Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our Haystack Live account presentation. So we're going to, give me 2 seconds, I'm just broadcasting this on YouTube. Marvelous. And that's not working, so I'm doing well so far. Okay, we're recording it anyway, so I'll tidy it up and broadcast it later. But anyway, just a couple of things to show you before we start. We've got our speaker today is going to be Dan Worley of Open Source Connections. He's going to be talking about search visualization strategies, so thanks in advance, Dan. A few other things to look out for. Next week, of course, we have our combined online conference, Buzz Haymice. We haven't managed to come up with a better name. The combination of Berlin buzzwords, Haystack and Mices. It's running all week, and there's a huge amount of content all about search and relevance, so do check that out if you haven't already. And we've got a number of our Haystack program speakers talking there as well, mainly on the Thursday and Friday. We've also got some training running on the Friday next week. That's search for product managers. So do pass that on to any product managers you know, to give them a great background in search. And we have our standard OSC training happening in July, our Think Like a Relevance Engineer courses. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dan, who's going to be giving our presentation today on an exploration of search visualization strategies. I will say, if you have questions for Dan, do keep a note of them and perhaps drop them into the chat, the Zoom chat, and then when Dan's finished, we'll run a round of questions. So anyway, Dan.
Hello, let me see if I can get my screen shared here. Just share the whole thing. So yeah, let's kick off presenter. Did that come through okay? Can you see it, Charlie? Thumbs up. Okay, cool. So today, as Charlie mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about an exploration of search visualization strategies. I'm surprised I pronounced that right. I always mispronounce it. This will be a sort of a high-level talk. We're not going to get into the weeds of best practices. Almost kind of a show and tell, some different things you might want to try out if you're not doing it already. Just a little intro about me. I'm Daniel Worley. I work for Open Source Connections, and I'm a search relevance strategist there. In case those words make no sense to you, I kind of dig into the guts of search engines and make them spit out the search results that people want when they're not finding the things that they have in their index. Just an overview for today, some topics we're going to talk about. Transparent boosting. A lot of people spend lots and lots of time of getting their baseline query, doing this magic behind the scenes, and that's just known as relevance sort. And sometimes they'll provide a drop down so you can sort by date, or maybe just a couple other options, but you don't have that really fine-grained control. So this is an area that helps your power users kind of tweak things to their liking. We'll do a little bit around histogram facets. This is probably the most basic thing today. You didn't see these a lot a few years ago, but I think more people are starting to see the power of these. And a lot of sites, see them on airlines. The Solar Admin interface has it now. We'll show a demo just kind of showing how those can work. We'll do a little bit with high resolution heat maps. Typically, when you see a heat map, I'll talk about it later, but you'll see this kind of traditional sort of gradient, and it's really low density. It doesn't give you a lot of information. So I'm going to talk about a way you can get really increase the detail of your heat maps if you have a use case that needs that. We'll talk about how you can better visualize your index statistics, sort of see what's going on when you're throwing all your data in your index. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see how it breaks down. So we'll cover that a little bit. And then just briefly talk a little bit about search experiences outside of your traditional search results page. So instead of typing something into Google, getting your list of 50 results, maybe some different experiences. So we'll kick off with transparent boosting. What we're trying to do here is sort of expose some of that complexity that's going on in a baseline query, all of those different types of boost methods on date. Maybe you're weighting title a little bit heavier than overview. Sometimes you can give a little of that control to your user, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's see. Just checking chat real quick. Zoom video, minimizing that. Hopefully this is better. But now I can't see if people are like hating it. Cool. All right. So let's go back. So yes, this will allow tweaking of the ranking algorithm by users that don't necessarily need to know what knobs are behind the or what's under the hood. So basically any user can come in and just sort of simply be able to tailor results to what they want to find. One method that came to mind when I was thinking about approaches to do this was a radar chart. And the first time I saw this was years and years ago, back in an old Nintendo DS game. They kind of showed what your strengths were and your brain in different areas in this concept of a radar chart. And what that does, you're kind of plotting a vector of different velocities on a 2D plane going off in different directions. And you can see the impact of each vector by how far it goes out. And when you sort of show the area between all the dots, you can get an idea of the impact each vector is having. And if we let users sort of drag these things around, they could control the different boosts in search. So that was kind of the idea I was going for with this. And this is just kind of a picture to show what I'm kind of talking about. We can see variable 1 here has a lot of impact, variable 2 a little less, and then if we're looking at this other sort of group B, we can see that variable 2 is way less than the other set in group A. And I think it's demo time, so let me switch gears. So this is just kind of a demo we have, kind of showing some different visualizations just with some movie search results. So I wanted to show off kind of this radar chart. Right now it's kind of flat lined out, but let's see if I search for someone that's been in a lot of movies. Maybe Bruce Willis. And I don't even know if he's been in romance movies. Let me see what the chat's got here. Small text. Yeah, I can fix that, I think. Hopefully that's a little better. But the idea is I was going to see maybe Bruce Willis is in romance movies. I don't know. Looks like, yeah, Look Who's Talking, maybe. Maybe a non-typical movie for Bruce Willis, so that's kind of cool. If I want more action, maybe we can get Die Hard up top. Maybe not, but we can see things are shifting around, which is neat, and that's what we expect. So that's kind of the idea behind this whole radar graph. And you can probably think of tons of UI things to sort of expose your boosts, but if you do have power users that are kind of seeking this functionality, it's just kind of an idea to toss out. Let's see. Can I get back to not zoomed in? Okay. So back to presenting here. I'm talking about histogram facets. When I say histogram, I'm really just talking about bar charts. Get rid of this. What this does, what you're hopefully accomplishing, if you have lots of difference between cardinality in your facets, this is a really nice visual indicator showing that, hey, maybe different genres or different facets have kind of more impact than others. Specifically, if you have lots of date range buckets, this can be a really powerful way of letting your users select a date range instead of just kind of showing them 2 date drop downs and hoping they know where the data is. This exposes where that is and can let them kind of drag a range across it and make their date range. So kind of spoiled this already, but I did kind of have this graph down here. So kind of doing back to baseline. If I pick comedy movies that are also dramas, uh, let's try finding our friend Bruce Willis again. And I found a movie that was a comedy and drama with Bruce Willis. And these kind of facets kind of helped me discover that. This may not be the best use case, but it kind of shows how you can tailor sort of these graphs that you typically see in reporting back to your search experience and help them drive it. Chat's looking good. Um, let's see. So next topic, I think is probably the coolest in the talk here is this concept of high resolution heat maps. So heat maps, especially in solar, kind of has some limitations right now. They're slow, limited to lower resolution. So if you try using it just out of the box, you're going to get a PNG that's kind of crappy looking. Sorry, David Smiley, if you're listening. And it blows up a lot. So if you try to say, hey, I want higher resolution, it'll just say, I don't like that. And it just gives a 500 or an error code. But there's some cool ideas to solve this. If you could execute a lot of small requests at once and sort of stitch all of the tiles together, then you can get a high resolution image based off a lot of smaller resolution images, if that makes sense. Kind of think of just like a tire image and then getting the different tiles inside of it and stitching all those together. And a concept that already does this really well is maps. If you've worked with any sort of map software, there's this old standard called a web map service where you can implement a protocol and you get sort of the bounding box passed in and you just have to return the data for that. And then the client side does all the work of stitching all of that together, which is pretty cool if we can leverage this to solve this problem. So I thought about this last night actually, and I was like, well, let me set up an API to provide these tiles for my map. Let me play with the rendering a little bit. So I'm doing my own rendering, and I'm just going to use open layers and point it at my WMS source and let it stitch it together and see what happens. So this is kind of an early attempt with some crime data. This was obviously, I think, based out of Africa, and it was kind of neat because you get the entire outline of Africa in kind of pixelated format and not really that loose cluster that you kind of see in other heat maps. So I can kind of show what when you think of a heat map, you might think of something like this. Sort of kind of like that. Maybe I can do everything. So that was a lot of stuff in California. We're trying to transfer to something like this to get really that dense amount of information, really pixelated, low level, really small cells. And the cool thing about this, let me refresh, make sure everything's working. We can kind of zoom in, do the enhance thing from kind of NCIS. And the further we go in, eventually it's going to say, I'm at a level of detail now. I can go back to even denser, and you can kind of get in here pretty deep. So that's pretty cool, I think. These are just earthquakes around the world, by the way, if I didn't mention that, since 1965. So since we have this fine level of detail, we can actually just kind of see the fault lines around the world. So I thought that turned out pretty cool. So the next thing is sort of a challenge, at least with all the search sort of collections I've worked over the years. You kind of have this big dump of data, and sometimes it's kind of hard to make sense of what fields are eating up the most disk space, like what has the most terms. And we thought that visualizations could help us sort of solve this problem, or at least help us make sense of what's there. And we're going to try to transform a dump of sort of JSON output that's really hard to make sense into an image that almost anyone can understand. So we want to try to avoid this kind of output. And sort of, there was this old project called Bearded Wookie that we've kind of brought back to life this year. And eventually it'll either probably get dropped into Cupid or Splatter, just a spoiler alert about that. But I don't want to stop share. I want to pull up this. So this was a the old project called Bearded Wookie, which kind of had this tree map. It was kind of just in a blog article. Recently this year, we kind of brought it back into its own Angular, whatever the current version of Angular is. It's its own module, so you can bring it into other projects and just sort of drop it in. But looking at the movie index, we can see just kind of a breakdown. We kind of have this text all field and text all taxonomy, text all idioms. And if I came back in and I was optimizing, I would say this is kind of wasteful. I'm actually making use of all this. So to me, I find this is a very nice way of breaking down what's in your index. And this is open source. So even if you don't want to wait until it's in Splatter or Cupid, you can make use of it. Just had another, I did it one time. There's a simpler index just to show you how it can break down. So this is just a really small index, but still you can sort of see the breakdown of fields. So our last topic was sort of thinking outside the SERP. And SERP, when I say that, is a search results page, sort of those typical 10 results that come back when you put in a query. And we're starting to see experiences where we're not even kind of in a web browser anymore doing sort of text queries anyways. Unity and UE4 are becoming more and more, not sure what the word I'm looking for, but they're on mobile. You can run these in web browsers now, but it's not your typical web page. It's just kind of it can be a 3D experience or a 2D experience that's kind of working with assets, but you could think of kind of the Matrix experiment or experience where Neo says like he needs guns, but instead of that, like you could be like, I need toys, lots of toys, and like all these toys fly in. You're like, I want Nerf guns, and then like it's just Nerf guns, and then you could actually reach out and grab one of those and see what it looks like before you make a purchase. So we're starting to see more things like that pop up, which is something really neat, I think, in the future to keep an eye out on if you're in those markets. Something, the screenshot on the right, something I wrote a while ago. It's not quite open source yet, but you could walk around these hallways, and anytime you looked at a picture, it would do more like this to expand the museum, and you could just get lost in there because it would just build the museum to what you've been liking. So that was kind of an interesting experiment. I've been rambling for a little bit now, but I want to thank everybody for joining. The repos here are available open source. I'm sure these slides will be shared. Hopefully 18 minutes, not too bad. If we want to open it up for questions, any questions?
So if you have, thank you, Dan. If you have a question for Dan, perhaps you want to, I think there's only a small group of us. If you'd just like to turn your video on, give us a wave and ask a question, that'd be great. Hopefully you're all actually there. I'm not just staring at a blank screen of lots of people who, here we are, fantastic. So Andy.
I'm trying to find my chat.
Hey, Andy.
Hey Dan. All right. I remember when I was with you guys in DC last year, we talked briefly about the Heatmap thing. And I remember David said that that PNG format was really, I think he intended it as a kind of a compact way to get the data out of Solar into something else.
Mm-hmm.
But where you said you've got a new Heatmap thing coming soon, is that a whole new feature? That sounds really exciting.
It's not built into Solar. What that's utilizing right now is just a little mini Flask API that's responding to WMS requests by open layers. So open layers is asking for a tile in the map. And then for each tile, I'm getting a high resolution image, but the tiles are really small. And then you stitch those together and it comes out into a decent looking picture.
Cool.
But if you try doing it all in one request, Solar typically blows up right now. So there may be work to be done to make that not happen. That shouldn't be too much overhead.
Yeah, cool. Could be interesting for us. Look forward to that.
So the data to build a heat map is stored directly within Solar?
Yes. So that was just some earthquake data that I indexed, some geospatial data.
Okay, and the query effectively returns a PNG?
Let me see. The query itself's not returning a PNG. If you look at Solar Spatial, you can ask for it to return a PNG or just return the counts for each cell. So I'm getting the counts for each cell, and then in Flask, I'm just rendering my own PNG with it's a really simple thing. The more earthquakes in a sector, the brighter it gets, brighter green. But you could think of all kinds of clever rendering techniques. Okay. One drawback of this approach, if you're doing WMS straight up, is that it is tiled. So if you want to do kind of bubble plots, they'll get cut off at the edge of a tile. Like one tile won't know what happened to the left of it. So you would have to do maybe another post-processing step if you wanted a nice pretty picture at the end.
Great, okay. Okay, so do we have another question for Dan?
Quiet crowd. Maybe I went too fast.
Well, I've got one to keep us going while people think of other questions. So looking at your heat map visualization, is that showing, when you say the amount of the index taken up by a field, is that correct there?
So that's doing term counts. It's not necessarily correlated to disk on space, or space on disk, I mean.
Okay.
You could do some approximation based on what the analyzer is to get that.
But what would you, I mean, it shows you which fields are taking up space in your index, effectively.
Yes, yes.
Okay, and so if you're in a situation where you weren't querying a field, but it's still in there, you could perhaps use this to identify unused fields, and then you could chop those out and reduce the size of your index.
Yes, absolutely. So that's probably what it's most useful for. Maybe like an experiment died off, but somehow the field made its way in production or something. You're just like, oh, that doesn't need to be there.
Okay, cool. So any further questions for Dan? That's what happened to you yesterday, Andy. This is the problem. If I know you too well, you're going to get volunteered. Has anyone got any other suggestions for crazy visualizations we could use for search applications? What else could we usefully show? And I've seen the heat map used before for visualizing information, showing the volume of information about a particular subject, but not in this way. Yeah, as Sue mentions, this is great stuff for analytics in general, living on top of search. And of course, in the world over there, of Elasticsearch, we've got Kibana, which provides a lot of these sort of things. But there isn't a Kibana alternative for Solar. Well, there is. There's Banana, a strangely named project from LucidWorks, which is a fork of an ancient version of Kibana, but we're pretty sure that's not maintained actively. Andy asks, is there any visualization for Solar graph search? How can we do that?
feel like I've seen those before. I don't have any handy to show all. I feel like Eric's got that in his arsenal somewhere. Maybe we should make a demo around that.
Yeah, and I've seen those kind of directed graph things. Yeah, the wobbly graphs that sort of move about. In fact, there's I believe there's one actually on the OSC website, a kind of animation on our website of something like that, but where you can kind of zoom into different areas of the graph and expand it. And again, I mean, you could power that off a solar backend, I guess. There's almost certainly some open source toolkits for doing that. Word clouds. Oh, there's a blast from the past. Do we like word clouds?
I still like them, but they've definitely waned in popularity. It depends on the quality of what's in there. Sometimes it's just a bunch of junk that's not helpful at all. So if you can get rid of the stop words and have the good stuff, I think it's useful.
Yes, I think we've all seen a word cloud where there's a great big "the" right in the middle of it. Clustering. Yeah.
That's kind of the next step. I used to have a clustered renderer for this heat map thing. So you can do sort of that, instead of WMS, you can just return a total image and do the stitching yourself and then do cool clustering on the data there. It's definitely doable. I don't have anything prepped for this demo. Sorry, Mia.
I think it's important with all of this stuff that I like what you said there. We do tend to focus very much on text and those 10 blue links. And again, if you think about a search engine as to support other use cases, you can think of all kind of clever ways of rendering that. Hopefully. John Kane, image search demo.
Yes. So I don't know the technology that's behind this link that I'm going to show next, but it's a rather interesting, I believe, somewhat open source capability of doing exploratory search over images.
Sure. If you'd like to share.
Yep. It's in the chat.
Wikiview.net.
Oh, very cool. Oh, that's awesome.
Basically what you do is over in the left-hand side, you can either upload an image and then do a similarity comparison against it, or you can just pick one and then rotate it around. Yeah, it's the UI takes a bit getting used to, but if your main business is essentially doing selling pictures or stock or whatever, that this gives a rather interesting way to explore what you don't know. You don't know what you're looking for, kind of thing. There are a couple icons to the right of the search bar, so you can search by color as well. A palette, you know, some people are interested in the color of the foreground or the background, and you can also filter by license if you want as well.
Cool.
This is done by and to give credit where credit is due, it's done by a sort of academic, I guess I'm not quite sure how to speak about them, but they have other projects related to image search and exploratories. Again, I don't know if the code is open source, but it gives a rather interesting way of providing people with a way to do exploratory search.
Thank you, John. That's great.
That's awesome, John. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Bart asks, have we thought about using the radar graph to visualize the impact of field booths on the relevancy score for debugging purposes?
I have thought about that. So Splatter kind of has the histogram right now, which is kind of effective, but I thought about maybe having an option to switch it on and off just to see what happens. It hasn't been implemented yet. It's just an idea out there, but you definitely could do that.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of Splatter and by extension some of the features in Cupid, which sits on Splatter, is to take all that debugging information you get out of Solar Elasticsearch, which is pretty impenetrable to be honest. I mean, you've got to be quite a search nerd to figure it out just by staring at the text, and give you a slightly easier thing to look at, to visualize really what's having an impact. So yeah, I mean, we're going to continue to develop that and add features to it as we can and as we find them useful. So yeah, it's a great idea, and you never know. Watch this space.
For sure.
So do we have any other questions or points, or any other great? Oh, here we go. Dimitri, any recommendation on displaying facets other than sets of links with numbers?
So that's kind of what the facet histogram was, sort of getting a bar chart to sort of show the cardinality. You could definitely do pie charts with it. Any sort of graph that you want to throw together in D3, you can hook together to filters in your search. So that's one way. I don't know if other people have other suggestions.
Any other suggestions for anyone? How could you display facets other than just a set of links and numbers?
I'm going to post an image here that I found related to the use of radar charts for splitting the demographics about how people take in news about COVID-19. So give me a moment.
Sure.
How do I post a file up here?
I don't think this chat lets you.
Directly into Zoom, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'll email it to you, Charlie. I know, maybe can I share my screen briefly?
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Sure, go for it.
All right, hold on. Let me re-find it here. All right. And then I want to share my screen. Where are you? Share screen. Okay. So let me expand it out a bit. I found this online recently, and it basically looks at how different demographics, age primarily, take their news for COVID topics. So you have Gen Z, very oriented to online videos. Millennials, online TV. Gen X, sort of more towards broadcast TV. And then Boomer demographics, again, more towards broadcast TV. In a previous life at an online dating site, looking at doing something along this lines for using, instead of these media outlets, each of the points on the radar chart would represent areas for a person's profile related to age, sex, location, and a couple others, including attractiveness, and then create either a demographic based upon something like this, or a statistical profile based upon the location. Most people that date are tend to be probably location sensitive more than other factors for the most part, and to utilize that as a default profile. And then behind the scenes, without a UI, so no search text bar, use these weights to essentially create a personalized experience.
So I think there's two things to take away from that. I mean, I like the fact that you've got those lines, faint lines, showing some kind of past or a similar set of parameters, but there must be either the history or something else. So that's quite neat. I like that kind of shadow of a past radar graph. The other thing, obviously, is if you were doing some kind of tuning experiment with a search engine, and we're able to select those points and drag them in and out to the center, that would give you a nice, potentially a nice UI for adjusting boosts and in an ongoing tuning situation where you had several things we wanted to try. But yeah, I think radar graphs are a great thing. They're nice and intuitive and easy to understand. Obviously, there's a point where they, if you've got 200 parameters, a radar graph is going to become less and less useful. There's probably, I guess you're probably talking in the tens of in terms of the amount of different parameters you could usefully represent on a radar graph. If you get any more than 20 or 30, it's going to get a little crowded.
I would agree with that.
And I guess with all of this visual stuff, the trick is, as ever, not to overload the user with something that looks really pretty but isn't actually useful. And we should remember that, it's very easy to put up a pretty picture and it's potentially very attractive to the marketing department or the executives, but how useful it is to the actual user to solve their problem is something we should all focus on.
Like anything, it always depends on the use case.
Of course.
Yep.
Of course. Do we have any other points or questions for Dan or for us or for the room? Great. Well, I'm going to call a halt there. I'd like to thank Dan for his talk today, and just to let you know about what's coming next. So I'll just show you this. If everyone can see that. Next week, we will not be having a Haystack Live talk on the Thursday because of the Buzz Haymice conference. Although, as I say, there's various talks drawn from the Haystack program on both the Thursday and the Friday of next week, so do check that out. The week after, Anthony Groves from O'Reilly will be talking about how to start climbing the relevance mountain. So bring your crampons. And the week after, Adam Waltz from Box is going to talk about something that sounds very inspiring, which is solar beyond the core, which sounds like a fantastic 1950s sci-fi film. We also have various training sessions running on the right there. If you're interested in any of those, do check out the website and let us know if you're interested. One of those, of course, is e-commerce product managers, which is happening next Friday as part of Buzz Haymice. So yeah, thank you for coming to Haystack Live, and thanks again to Dan, our presenter, and we look forward to welcoming you back soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.